The whispers started the moment Delilah Summers stepped off the stagecoach in Eagar, Arizona, her body pressing against the narrow doorframe as she maneuvered her way down the steps with all the dignity she could muster in the summer heat of 1878. She heard the words before her boots even touched the dusty street, the cruel murmurs that followed her like a shadow everywhere she went, the sideways glances from women clutching their parasols and men turning away, as though her very presence offended their sensibilities. At 22 years old, she had learned to hold her head high despite the weight of their judgment, despite the way her father had sent her away from St. Louis with barely enough money for a fresh start and a letter of introduction to a distant cousin who ran a boarding house in this remote Arizona Territory town. The sun beat down mercilessly as Delilah collected her single worn trunk from the back of the stage, her dress already clinging to her skin with perspiration. Eagar sat nestled in the high country of eastern Arizona, a town born from Mormon settlement and cattle ranching, where the White Mountains rose in the distance, and the little Colorado River provided precious water to the hardy souls who chose to make their lives in this unforgiving landscape. The main street stretched before her, lined with false-fronted buildings that promised supplies, sustenance, and judgment in equal measure. "You need help with that, miss?" The stagecoach driver asked the question without meeting her eyes, already turning away before she could answer. "I can manage," Delilah said quietly, gripping the trunk's handle with both hands and dragging it toward the wooden sidewalk. Her corset dug into her flesh, too tight as always, purchased years ago when her mother still harbored hopes that Delilah might somehow transform into the willowy daughter she had always wanted. Those hopes had died slowly, replaced by disappointed sighs and her father's increasingly cold silences at the dinner table. The boarding house stood 3 buildings down, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and curtains in the windows that looked cleaner than most. Delilah pulled her trunk along the boardwalk, aware of every eye that followed her progress, every conversation that stopped as she passed. A group of women outside the general store fell silent, their faces arranged in expressions that somehow managed to convey both pity and disdain. 2 cowboys lounging against a hitching post straightened up to watch her, one elbowing the other and saying something that made them both laugh. She had almost reached the boarding house when a child darted out from between buildings, a boy of perhaps 7 or 8 chasing a rolling hoop. He ran directly into Delilah's path, and she stopped short to avoid trampling him. The boy looked up at her, his eyes going wide, and then he was scrambling backward as though she were something monstrous. "Ma," he shouted, running back the way he had come. "Ma, there is a really fat lady on the street." The words hit like physical blows, each one landing in the places she was already bruised. Delilah stood frozen for a moment, her hand still gripping the trunk handle, her face burning with humiliation. She forced herself to keep moving, to drag her trunk the last few feet to the boarding house steps, to climb them one at a time while her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. The door opened before she could knock, and a woman in her 40s stood framed in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She had kind eyes and gray streaking through her brown hair, and when she looked at Delilah, there was no judgment in her expression, only tired sympathy. "You must be Delilah," she said. "I am Martha Collins, your cousin Grace's friend. Grace wrote to say you would be coming. Lord, child, you look done in. Come inside out of this heat." The boarding house's interior was blessedly cool and clean, with simple furniture and the smell of bread baking somewhere in the back. Martha helped Delilah drag her trunk inside and shut the door firmly behind them, as though closing out the cruelty of the world beyond. Grace had to go to Springerville for supplies, Martha explained, gesturing for Delilah to follow her up a narrow staircase. She will be back tomorrow. I have been keeping your room ready. It is small, but it is yours for as long as you need it. The room was indeed small, tucked under the eaves on the second floor, but it had a real bed with a quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the backyard where chickens scratched in the dirt. After the cold reception she had received in the street, this simple kindness felt like a treasure beyond price. "Thank you," Delilah managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I cannot tell you how much I appreciate this." Martha patted her arm gently. "This town can be hard on people they see as different, but you will find your way. There is always work for those willing to do it, and Grace says you are good with sewing and mending." "I am," Delilah confirmed. "And cooking. I can do laundry, cleaning, anything honest." "We will talk more after you have rested. Supper is at 6. There are 4 other boarders right now, all men, so meals can be a bit rowdy, but they are decent enough." Martha moved toward the door, then paused. "Pay no mind to what people say, dear. Their words say more about them than they do about you." After Martha left, Delilah sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry, pressing her face into her hands to muffle the sound. She had hoped that coming west, leaving behind the society drawing rooms of St. Louis, where she had been a constant disappointment, might somehow be different. But cruelty, it seemed, was the same everywhere, dressed in different clothes but speaking the same language. She cried until she had no tears left, then washed her face in the basin and unpacked her few belongings. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, she had composed herself, pinned her dark blonde hair into a neat bun, and changed into a fresh dress that was only slightly less wrinkled than the one she had traveled in. She made her way downstairs to the dining room, steeling herself for whatever might come next. The dining room held a long table already occupied by 4 men in various states of cleanliness. They all looked up when Delilah entered, their conversations dying away. She felt their eyes on her, felt the familiar assessment and the inevitable disappointment, and she moved quickly to take the seat Martha indicated at the far end of the table. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Delilah Summers," Martha announced, bringing in a platter of roasted chicken. "She is Grace's cousin, newly arrived from St. Louis. I expect you all to mind your manners." 3 of the men mumbled greetings and returned to their plates. The 4th, a grizzled man in his 50s with tobacco-stained teeth, stared at Delilah with undisguised curiosity. "St. Louis, huh?" he said. "Long way to come. What brings a gal like you out to the territory?" "Fresh start," Delilah said quietly, keeping her eyes on her plate as Martha served her chicken and potatoes. "Must have been some reason for leaving," the man pressed. "Pretty city like St. Louis seems like it would have plenty for a young woman." "Robert, that is enough," Martha said sharply. "Miss Summers's business is her own." The meal passed in uncomfortable silence after that, broken only by the sounds of eating and an occasional request to pass the bread. Delilah ate sparingly despite her hunger, too aware of every bite she took, every movement she made. When the meal finally ended and she could escape back to her room, she felt as though she had survived some kind of ordeal. She spent her first night in Eagar lying awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling and the distant howl of coyotes in the hills. She thought about her mother's relief when she had finally agreed to leave St. Louis, about her father's stern lecture on making something of herself and not embarrassing the family any further. She thought about the boy in the street and his shouted words, and she wondered if she would ever find a place in the world where she could simply exist without apology. The next morning, Grace arrived back from Springerville driving a wagon loaded with supplies. She was a sturdy woman in her late 20s with sun-weathered skin and capable hands, and she greeted Delilah with a firm hug that felt genuine. "So you made it," Grace said, looking Delilah up and down with an assessing eye that held no malice. "Good. I have been needing help with the mending. These cowboys tear through clothes faster than I can repair them, and Martha has her hands full with the cooking and cleaning. Can you start today?" Delilah could have kissed her for her matter-of-fact tone, for treating her like a person rather than a problem. "Yes, absolutely. Just show me what needs doing." Grace led her to a back room filled with baskets of clothing in various states of disrepair. Shirts with torn seams, trousers with holes worn through the knees, socks that needed darning, and work clothes stained with everything from mud to blood. Delilah set to work immediately, grateful to have something useful to occupy her hands and her mind. Over the following days, she fell into a routine. She woke early, helped Martha with breakfast, then spent her mornings doing mending and alterations. In the afternoons, she helped with laundry or food preparation, and in the evenings, she served meals to the boarders and cleaned up afterward. Grace paid her fairly and provided her room and board, and while it was not the life her mother had once imagined for her, it was honest work and it was hers. But the town's judgment followed her everywhere she ventured beyond the boarding house walls. When she walked to the general store to purchase thread, conversations stopped. When she attended Sunday services at the small church, she sat alone in the back pew while families clustered together, their children instructed in whispers to stay away. The townswomen treated her with cool politeness at best and open disdain at worst, as though her body were evidence of some moral failing, some lack of discipline or character that marked her as unworthy of their company. The men were worse in different ways. Some ignored her completely, looking through her as though she did not exist. Others stared with a kind of morbid curiosity, the way one might stare at a carnival oddity. And a few, the ones who made her skin crawl, looked at her with an expression she could not quite name, something between contempt and hunger, as though they believed her body made her desperate enough to accept any attention at all. She learned to keep her head down, to speak only when spoken to make herself as small as possible despite the fact that her body refused to cooperate with that wish. She learned which streets to avoid at certain times of day, which shops were less hostile than others, which faces would meet her eyes and which would not. She built her life in the margins, in the spaces where she could exist without causing too much offense. 3 weeks after her arrival in Eagar, everything changed because of a horse. Delilah was walking back from the general store, her arms full of the fabric Grace had ordered for new curtains, when she heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered near the livery stable, and in the center of the chaos was a young man struggling to control a large bay stallion that was rearing and plunging, eyes rolling white with fear or fury. The horse was magnificent even in its terror, all-powerful muscle and flowing mane, and the man holding its lead rope was being jerked around like a rag doll. "Someone get the sheriff," a voice shouted. "That animal is going to kill someone. Just shoot the damned thing," another voice called out. "No," the young man with the rope had desperation in his voice. "He just needs time. He is just scared. Please do not shoot him." The horse reared again, nearly pulling the young man off his feet, and the crowd surged backward. Delilah found herself pressed against the wall of the livery, the fabric still clutched in her arms, unable to look away from the scene unfolding before her. Several men had rifles now, raising them toward the panicked animal, and the young man was shouting, pleading, but no one was listening. That was when he arrived. Delilah did not know his name yet, but she would never forget her first sight of him. He came from the direction of the open range, riding a gray gelding at an easy lope, dust rising from the hooves. He was tall in the saddle, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who spent his life working cattle. He wore a faded blue shirt, worn leather chaps, and a hat pulled low against the sun, and when he saw what was happening, he dismounted in one fluid motion and walked straight into the chaos as though he owned it. "Hold your fire," he said, his voice carrying authority despite not being raised. "Put the guns down, now." Something in his tone made the men hesitate. The young man with the rope looked at him with desperate hope. "Mister, can you help? He is a good horse, I swear it. He just got spooked by a snake this morning and he has not settled since. I cannot get him calm." The tall cowboy studied the horse for a long moment. His posture relaxed, despite the animal's continued plunging. Then he walked forward slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried, speaking in a low voice that Delilah could not quite hear over the noise of the crowd. The horse's ears flicked toward him, then back, then toward him again. The cowboy kept talking, kept walking until he was close enough to reach out one hand. The horse snorted and danced sideways, but the cowboy did not flinch. He simply stood there, hand extended, still speaking in that low, steady voice. Minutes passed. The crowd grew quiet watching, and slowly, impossibly, the horse began to settle. Its ears came forward, its breathing slowed. And finally, carefully, it stretched out its neck and touched its nose to the cowboy's outstretched hand. The relief in the crowd was palpable. The young man with the rope was nearly crying with gratitude. The cowboy took the rope gently, ran his hand along the horse's neck, and continued speaking softly until the animal was standing calm, head lowered, accepting his touch. "He is a good horse," the cowboy said to the young man, "but he has been mishandled somewhere in his past. See how he favors his left side. Someone hit him there, probably repeatedly. He needs patient handling and time to learn to trust again." "I can do that," the young man said eagerly. "I will do whatever it takes." The cowboy nodded and carefully transferred the rope back. "Walk him slow. Keep your voice low. No sudden movements, and find him a quiet stall away from the main traffic for a few days while he settles." As the crowd began to disperse, Delilah realized she was still standing frozen against the livery wall, the fabric clutched to her chest. She started to turn away, to slip back toward the boarding house before anyone noticed her. But in that moment, the cowboy's eyes swept across the dispersing crowd and landed on her. She froze, waiting for the familiar flicker of disgust or dismissal. But his eyes, a striking blue-green even from a distance, simply met hers for a brief moment before he tipped his hat in a polite acknowledgement and turned back to his gray gelding. It was such a small gesture, barely worth noting, but it left Delilah standing there feeling strangely unbalanced. No one ever tipped their hat to her. She hurried back to the boarding house, her heart beating faster than the walk warranted, and spent the rest of the day trying not to think about blue-green eyes and a voice that could calm a panicked horse. It meant nothing. He had probably not even really seen her, and even if he had, he was certainly like all the rest once he got a proper look at her in full daylight. But 2 days later, he walked into the boarding house dining room for supper. Delilah was setting the table when the door opened, and he ducked through, removing his hat to reveal dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly, a strong jaw dusted with stubble, sun-weathered skin, and those remarkable eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He looked to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was and what he was capable of. "Evening," he said to Martha, who was bringing out a pot of stew. I am looking for lodging for a few weeks while I work a contract for the Miller Ranch. Someone in town said you might have a room available. I do, Martha confirmed, sizing him up with the practiced eye of someone who had been running a boarding house for years. Meals included, laundry extra. Payment in advance. Fair enough. He pulled coins from his pocket and counted them out into Martha's hand. Name is Samuel Lancaster. Most folks call me Sam. Martha introduced him to the other boarders as they filtered in for supper, and then her eyes found Delilah still standing by the table with silverware in her hands. And this is Miss Delilah Summers. She helps me and Grace run the place. Sam turned those blue-green eyes on her and smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his serious face. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Summers. I appreciate the hospitality. Delilah managed a small nod, not trusting her voice, and quickly finished setting the table before retreating to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking as she helped Martha dish up the stew, and she could not explain why. Men smiled at her all the time, pitying smiles, mocking smiles, cruel smiles. But Sam Lancaster had smiled at her the way he might smile at any woman, as though she were simply another person worthy of basic courtesy. During supper, she kept her eyes on her plate as usual, but she found herself hyper-aware of Sam's presence at the other end of the table. He ate with good manners, spoke when spoken to but did not dominate the conversation, and treated Martha and Delilah with the same easy respect he showed the men. When Robert, the grizzled boarder who seemed to enjoy making everyone uncomfortable, made a crude joke about a woman in town, Sam did not laugh. He simply continued eating, his expression neutral, and somehow that lack of response was more effective than any rebuke. After supper, as Delilah was clearing the table, Sam brought his dishes to the kitchen without being asked. "Thank you for the meal," he said, setting the plates carefully on the counter. "Best stew I have had in weeks." "Martha is an excellent cook," Delilah said, keeping her eyes on the dishes. "And I imagine the boarding house would not run half so smoothly without your help as well," Sam said. "Running a place like this is no small feat." Delilah glanced up at him, searching for mockery or hidden meaning, but his expression was sincere. "I do what I can," she said carefully. He nodded, as though this were a perfectly reasonable response, and headed upstairs to his room. Delilah stood in the kitchen long after he had gone, dishes forgotten in her hands, trying to understand what had just happened. In her experience, men like Sam Lancaster, handsome, capable men who commanded respect, did not see women like her at all. They certainly did not go out of their way to speak to her or thank her for her work. It had to be a fluke, she told herself. Tomorrow he would realize what the rest of the town already knew, that she was someone to be pitied or mocked or ignored, and things would return to normal. She would be invisible again, and that was fine. That was safer. But the next morning at breakfast, Sam said good morning to her directly. And that evening at supper, he complimented the biscuits she had made. And the day after that, when she was struggling to carry a basket of wet laundry out to the clothesline, he appeared seemingly from nowhere and took the basket from her hands without a word, carrying it to the line and waiting while she pinned up the clothes before carrying the empty basket back inside for her. "You did not have to do that," Delilah said, flustered by his continued kindness. "I can manage." "I know you can," Sam said simply, "but there is no harm in accepting help when it is offered." She had no response to that. She had spent so long proving she could manage, could pull her own weight despite what everyone thought of her, that accepting help felt like admitting defeat. But Sam did not seem to be offering help out of pity. He carried laundry baskets for Martha too. He helped Grace unload supplies from the wagon. He fixed a loose hinge on the front door without being asked. He simply saw work that needed doing and did it, regardless of who benefited. Over the following week, Delilah found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice. She watched how he moved with easy grace despite his size, how he was gentle with the horses and patient with children who ran up to him on the street, how he never raised his voice but somehow always seemed to be heard. She watched how other men respected him, how women smiled at him in ways they never smiled at her, how he moved through the world with a kind of quiet assurance she envied desperately. And she watched how he treated her exactly the same as he treated everyone else, with basic respect and kindness, as though it never occurred to him to do otherwise. It was dangerous, she knew, to read anything into his behavior. He was simply a good man with good manners, and his contract with the Miller Ranch would be finished soon, and he would move on to the next job in the next town, and she would never see him again. That was how life worked for men like him and women like her. Their paths might cross briefly, but they were traveling in fundamentally different directions. But then came the incident at the general store, and everything changed again. Delilah had gone to purchase buttons for a shirt she was mending, a simple errand that should have taken 15 minutes. She entered the store quietly, as always, and waited patiently while the proprietor, Mr. Henderson, finished serving two women who were examining bolts of fabric. The women glanced at her, whispered to each other, and deliberately turned their backs, making it clear they did not intend to acknowledge her presence. Delilah was used to this. She simply waited, examining the buttons in their small wooden compartments, selecting the ones she needed. But when the women finally left and she approached the counter, Mr. Henderson looked at her with barely concealed distaste. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone just short of openly rude. "6 buttons, please," Delilah said quietly, showing him the ones she had selected. "The horn ones, 3/4 inch." Mr. Henderson made a show of counting out the buttons with excruciating slowness, dropping them one by one onto the counter. "That will be 30 cents, he said, naming a price that was at least twice what the buttons were worth. Delilah's face flushed. "Mr. Henderson, these buttons were marked at 12 cents the last time I purchased them." "Prices went up," he said flatly. 30 cents or put them back." She knew what this was. It was a tax for being someone the town did not want, a reminder that she existed on their sufferance. She could pay it or argue and make things worse for herself. She was reaching into her purse for the coins when the door opened behind her. "Afternoon, Henderson," Sam's voice said, and suddenly he was standing beside her at the counter. "Miss Summers, I thought that was you. Are you finished with your shopping? I was hoping to walk you back to the boarding house if you are headed that way." The change in Mr. Henderson's demeanor was instantaneous. His expression shifted from contempt to careful neutrality, and he actually smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Lancaster, did not see you come in. How can I help you?" "Miss Summers was just purchasing these buttons," Sam said, his tone pleasant but with an edge of steel underneath. "I believe they are normally 12 cents, Mr. Henderson's jaw tightened. "I was just telling Miss Summers that prices have increased." "Funny," Sam said mildly. "Those look like the same buttons Mrs. Porter purchased yesterday, and I am fairly certain she paid 12 cents. Or was that a different type of button?" The air in the store seemed to thicken. Mr. Henderson's face reddened, but he was trapped by his own lie and clearly unwilling to argue with Sam Lancaster in front of potential witnesses. "My mistake," he said tightly. 12 cents. Delilah placed the coins on the counter with trembling hands, took the buttons, and turned toward the door. Sam held it open for her, and they stepped out into the afternoon sunlight together. Delilah walked several paces before her legs began to shake so badly she had to stop and steady herself against a post. "That man is a coward and a cheat," Sam said, his voice still carrying that edge of controlled anger. "And I intend to speak to the sheriff about his business practices." "Please do not," Delilah said quickly. "It will only make things worse for me." Sam turned to look at her fully, and for the first time since they had met, she saw genuine anger in his eyes, though she understood instinctively it was not directed at her. "He has done this to you before." It was not a question. Delilah looked away, clutching the buttons in her hand. "It is nothing I cannot handle. That is not the same as saying it is right or fair." "Life is rarely either of those things," Delilah said quietly. "And people like Mr. Henderson feel entitled to make things difficult for people like me." "People like you," Sam repeated, and something in his tone made her look up at him. His expression was intense, searching. "And what exactly does that mean, Miss Summers?" She gestured helplessly at herself, at her body that had always been her greatest shame. "You have eyes. You can see what the town sees. I see a woman who works hard, who is kind to everyone despite having little kindness returned, who makes excellent biscuits and has a way with mending that borders on artistry based on the shirt you repaired for me last week." Sam's voice was firm. "What exactly should I be seeing instead?" Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "You know what I mean." "I genuinely do not," Sam said, and the honest confusion in his voice nearly undid her. "If you are referring to your appearance, the only thing I have noticed is that you have lovely eyes and a smile you hide far too often. Beyond that, I confess I do not pay much attention to such things. I have always been more interested in a person's character than their appearance." She stared at him, certain she must have misheard or misunderstood. "You cannot mean that." "Why would I say it if I did not mean it?" Sam tilted his head, studying her. "Miss Summers, I have spent most of my adult life working with animals, particularly horses. Do you know what I have learned? That the flashiest horse, the one with the perfect conformation and the glossy coat, is often high-strung and unreliable, while the plain horse, the one nobody wants to look at twice, is often the most loyal, the hardest working, the one who will carry you through a storm without faltering. Appearance tells you nothing about what matters." "People are not horses," Delilah whispered. "No," Sam agreed, "but the principle holds. I judge people by their actions, not their appearance, and your actions, from everything I have observed, mark you as someone worthy of respect and kindness. The fact that this town refuses to see that says far more about them than it does about you." Delilah could not speak past the lump in her throat. She had spent her entire life being told, in ways both subtle and overt, that her body made her unworthy of love, of respect, of basic human dignity. And here was this man, this stranger who had no reason to lie to her, telling her that none of it mattered, that she was worthy simply because of who she was rather than what she looked like. It was too much. It was impossible. And yet the sincerity in his eyes made it difficult to dismiss his words as mere politeness. "Thank you," she finally managed, "for what you did in there, and for what you just said." Sam's expression softened. "I only spoke the truth. And I meant what I said about walking you back, if you would like the company." They walked together through the dusty streets of Eagar, past the curious stares and whispered conversations that followed them. For once, Delilah found she did not care quite as much what people thought. She was too focused on the quiet presence beside her. On the way, Sam matched his long stride to her shorter one, on how he pointed out a hawk circling overhead, and told her about tracking a mountain lion the previous week while moving cattle. When they reached the boarding house, Sam tipped his hat to her with that same easy courtesy he had shown from the beginning. "Thank you for the company, Miss Summers. I hope you have a pleasant afternoon." Delilah watched him walk toward the livery where his horse was stabled, and for the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. It took her several minutes to identify it as hope. Over the next 2 weeks, Sam found reasons to spend time near her. He would sit in the kitchen while she worked on mending, claiming the light was better there for reading his letters. He would offer to walk with her when she needed to run errands, his presence making shopkeepers think twice about their treatment of her. He would tell her stories about his work, about the ranches he had worked and the horses he had trained. And gradually, she began to share stories of her own life before Eagar, carefully edited to remove the most painful parts. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms and the smell of rain on dry earth. They both preferred the quiet hours of early morning to the bustle of midday. They both believed that animals often showed more loyalty and kindness than humans. These small shared preferences felt like treasures to Delilah, proof that she could connect with another person beyond the surface level of basic courtesy. And slowly, carefully, Delilah began to trust that Sam's kindness was genuine, that he truly did not see her the way the rest of the town did. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, this feeling of being seen as a whole person rather than a body to be judged and found wanting. But she was careful not to read too much into his attention. Sam was kind to everyone. His contract would end soon. And even if he did enjoy her company, that was a far cry from any deeper feeling. She guarded her heart carefully, knowing the danger of wanting more than life was likely to give her. Then came the dance. Eagar was holding a community celebration to mark the end of summer, with a dance in the evening and competitions during the day. The entire town was buzzing with preparations, and even the boarders at Martha's place were planning to attend. Delilah had no intention of going. She had learned long ago that dances were not for women like her, that standing on the sidelines watching others enjoy themselves was more painful than simply staying home. But on the morning of the celebration, Sam found her hanging laundry in the backyard. "Miss Summers," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice that she had never heard before. "I was wondering if you might do me the honor of accompanying me to the dance this evening." Delilah nearly dropped the sheet she was holding. "What? The dance?" Sam repeated, meeting her eyes steadily. "I would very much like to attend with you if you are willing." "I do not think that is a good idea," Delilah said carefully, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The town already has opinions about me. I would not want to make things difficult for you." "What if I do not care what the town thinks?" Sam asked quietly. "What if I simply want to spend an evening dancing with someone whose company I enjoy?" "You could spend an evening dancing with any woman in this territory," Delilah said, frustration creeping into her voice despite her best efforts. "Why would you choose me?" Sam stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Because in the 3 weeks I have been in Eagar, you are the only person I have met who I actually want to spend time with. Because you are intelligent and kind and you see the world in ways that make me think differently. Because when I imagine that dance, the only person I want to be dancing with is you." Delilah's breath caught in her throat. "Sam, you do not understand. People will talk. They will say terrible things. They will wonder what is wrong with you for choosing me." "Then let them wonder," Sam said simply. "I stopped living my life according to other people's expectations a long time ago. I am asking what you want, Delilah. Not what you think you should want, or what you think is appropriate, but what you actually want. Would you like to go to the dance with me?" She should say no. She should protect him from the town's judgment and protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak when he realized what a mistake he had made. She should be sensible and practical and keep her heart safely locked away. "Yes," she whispered instead. "Yes, I would like that very much." Sam's face transformed with a smile that made her knees weak. "Good. I will call for you at 7. The hours until 7 o'clock passed in a blur of panic and preparation. Grace and Martha, when they heard Sam had invited Delilah to the dance, sprang into action with the efficiency of generals planning a military campaign. They pulled out a dress that had belonged to Grace's late mother, a beautiful dark green that actually fit Delilah properly, and spent an hour taking it in and letting it out until it hung perfectly. Martha did her hair, pinning it up in a style that was elegant without being ostentatious, and Grace even produced a small bottle of rose water for her to dab behind her ears. "You look beautiful," Martha declared at 6:45, and Grace nodded firmly in agreement. Delilah barely recognized herself in the small mirror. The dress made her eyes look deeper, and her hair looked golden rather than simply brown. For a moment, she could almost believe she was the kind of woman a man like Sam Lancaster might actually want to be seen with. Then the doubts crashed back in. What was she thinking? The whole town would see them together. They would laugh at him for choosing her. They would pity him or mock him or assume he had some ulterior motive. She would be the subject of gossip for weeks, and Sam would come to regret his impulsive invitation. She was on the verge of changing back into her everyday dress when Sam knocked on the front door. He had cleaned up for the occasion. She saw when Martha ushered him into the parlor. He wore a pressed white shirt and a black vest, and his hair was still damp from washing. When he saw Delilah, he stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening. "Miss Summers," he said softly, "you look absolutely beautiful." The sincerity in his voice made her believe him, at least for the moment. She accepted the arm he offered, and together they walked out into the warm evening air. The dance was being held in the church hall, which had been decorated with lanterns and wildflowers. Music spilled out into the street, fiddles and guitars blending in lively melodies. Delilah's steps slowed as they approached, her courage faltering. "We do not have to go in if you do not want to," Sam said quietly, sensing her hesitation. "We could take a walk instead, or sit on the porch and listen to the music from outside." "No," Delilah said, lifting her chin. "I want to go in. I want to dance with you." The conversations did not exactly stop when they entered, but they faltered noticeably. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Whispers spread like ripples across a pond. Delilah felt every stare like a physical touch, felt the weight of judgment and speculation and disbelief. But Sam simply kept walking, his hand steady under hers, leading her toward the area cleared for dancing. "Sam Lancaster," a woman's voice called out, bright and false. "What a surprise to see you here." Sam turned to acknowledge a young woman in a yellow dress who was smiling at him with obvious interest. She was pretty in the way Delilah would never be, delicate and small-waisted, with perfect curls framing her face. "Miss Porter," Sam said politely. "Good evening. May I introduce Miss Delilah Summers?" "Delilah, this is Rebecca Porter." Rebecca's eyes flicked over Delilah with barely concealed disdain. "Oh yes, we have met. Or rather, I have seen her around town. How unusual for you to bring her as your escort, Mr. Lancaster." "Unusual how?" Sam asked, his voice taking on that edge Delilah had heard in the general store. Rebecca blinked, clearly not expecting to be challenged. "Well, I simply meant it is unusual to see her at social events. I am certain she must feel out of place." "She would feel considerably more comfortable if people would practice basic courtesy," Sam said coolly. "Now, if you will excuse us, I believe they are starting a waltz." He led Delilah onto the dance floor before Rebecca could respond. Delilah's hands were shaking as Sam took one in his and placed his other hand respectfully at her waist. "I have never waltzed before," she whispered. "I will probably step on your feet. Then I will probably step on yours as well," Sam said with a smile, "and we will muddle through together." The music began, and Sam led her into the steps. He was a better dancer than he had claimed, guiding her smoothly through the turns, patient when she faltered. After a few minutes, Delilah began to relax into the rhythm, letting him lead, trusting him not to let her stumble. She was so focused on the steps that she did not notice the other couples gradually leaving the floor. But Sam noticed, and his jaw tightened. "Look at me," he said quietly. "Do not look at them, just look at me." Delilah raised her eyes to his and found them burning with an intensity that stole her breath. They were alone on the dance floor now, the entire town watching, and Sam did not slow or stop. He kept dancing with her as though they were the only two people in the room, as though her body was not something shameful but simply the body of a woman he wanted to dance with. "Why are you doing this?" Delilah whispered, tears threatening. "Why would you make yourself a spectacle for me?" "I am not doing this for you," Sam said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am doing this with you because I want to. Because in 3 weeks, you have become the most important person in my life. Because I am tired of watching you hide yourself away as though you have anything to apologize for." "Sam, you barely know me." "I know enough," he said firmly. "I know you are brave and kind. I know you make me laugh. I know that I think about you from the moment I wake up until the moment I fall asleep. I know that I have traveled half this territory without finding a place that felt like home, but when I am near you, I feel like I have finally found where I belong." The music ended. In the silence that followed, Delilah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The entire room was staring at them, some faces curious, some scandalized, some openly hostile. "Sam," she breathed. "Are you saying—" "I am saying I am falling in love with you," Sam said clearly, loudly enough that anyone nearby could hear. "And I do not care who knows it." The gasps and whispers that followed were drowned out by the roaring in Delilah's ears. This could not be happening. Men like Sam Lancaster did not fall in love with women like her. It was a beautiful dream, but she would wake up soon and find it had all been wishful thinking. But Sam was real, standing in front of her, his hand still holding hers, his eyes steady and sure. "I do not expect you to feel the same way," Sam continued, his voice gentler now. "And I know 3 weeks is not long, but I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that when I look at you, I see someone extraordinary, someone I want to build a life with if you would have me." "Why?" The word burst out of her, raw and desperate. "Why would you want me when you could have anyone?" "Because I do not want anyone," Sam said simply. "I want you. Your kindness, your strength, your smile, the way you hum while you are working, the way you are gentle with everyone even when they do not deserve it, the way you see beauty in small things. That is what I am falling in love with, Delilah. Not some imaginary woman, but you, exactly as you are." Delilah was crying now, unable to stop the tears from streaming down her face. "The town said I was too heavy to love." "Then the town is full of fools," Sam said fiercely. "You are not too anything, Delilah. You are exactly right. And I do not care what anyone else says." Around them, the whispers had grown louder. Someone laughed, sharp and mocking. Delilah felt the old shame rising, the instinct to apologize and disappear. But when she looked into Sam's eyes, she saw only certainty, only truth, only a love so pure it took her breath away. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "but I am so afraid." "Of what?" Sam asked gently. "That you will realize you made a mistake, that you will come to resent me. That the town will make your life miserable, and you will wish you had never met me." Sam raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles softly. "The only mistake I could make would be letting you go. The only thing I resent is a world that tried to make you believe you were anything less than wonderful. and I have never cared much what other people think of my choices." The fiddle started up again, a slower song this time. Sam pulled her close and they began to dance again, moving together in perfect rhythm. Gradually, other couples filtered back onto the floor, though Delilah barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to the man holding her, to the steady beat of his heart beneath her hand, to the feeling of being cherished for the first time in her life. They stayed at the dance for another hour, and Sam danced with her for every single song. When they finally left, walking back through the quiet streets of Eagar under a canopy of stars, Delilah felt transformed. The town's judgment had not disappeared, but it had lost its power over her. She was still the same person she had been that morning, but now she knew she was loved, truly and completely, not despite who she was but because of it. At the boarding house porch, Sam turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "My contract with the Miller Ranch ends in 3 days," he said. "I need to tell you that I have been offered a permanent position here in Eagar, managing their horse breeding program. It is good work, steady work, the kind of work that would let a man put down roots, build a life." Delilah's heart leaped. "Are you going to take it?" "That depends," Sam said softly. "I need to know if you see a future here with me." "Yes," Delilah said without hesitation. "Yes, I want that more than anything." Sam's smile was brilliant in the starlight. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he kissed her softly, reverently, as though she were something precious. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Delilah was dizzy with joy. "I should warn you," Sam said, his forehead resting against hers. "I am not a rich man. I cannot offer you fancy dresses or a big house, just honest work, a simple life, and all the love I have." "That is all I have ever wanted," Delilah whispered. "That is everything." They stayed on the porch talking until midnight, making plans and sharing dreams, and when Delilah finally went to bed, she lay awake for hours, replaying every moment, every word, unable to quite believe that this was real, that she was allowed to be this happy. The next day, the town's reaction was swift and predictable. The general store refused to serve Delilah entirely, and Mr. Henderson made his feelings clear about women who put on airs above their station. The women she passed on the street were colder than ever, their whispers following her like a dark cloud. Even some of the boarders at Martha's place made pointed comments about the foolishness of young men who let sentiment override good sense. But Sam was unmoved by all of it. He walked with Delilah everywhere, his hand at her back or holding hers, making it clear to everyone that he had chosen her and would not be swayed. When a group of cowboys at the saloon made crude jokes about his choice of woman, Sam calmly invited the loudest one outside and, according to witnesses, knocked him flat with a single punch. "I do not appreciate hearing the woman I love spoken of disrespectfully," Sam reportedly said while standing over the stunned cowboy. "Anyone else have comments to share?" No one did, and the story spread through Eagar like wildfire. Sam Lancaster had claimed Delilah Summers publicly, violently if necessary, and he was not backing down. The town did not know what to make of it, but they began to realize that their judgment was not going to change his mind. Grace and Martha were delighted by the courtship, treating Sam like the son they had never had and fussing over wedding plans before Sam had even formally proposed. The other boarders gradually warmed to the relationship as well, won over by Sam's steadfast devotion and Delilah's quiet happiness. 2 weeks after the dance, Sam took Delilah on a ride into the mountains. They rode for hours through pine forests and meadows full of wildflowers, until they reached a high ridge with a view that stretched for miles. The white mountains rolled away in every direction, and the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. Sam helped Delilah dismount and led her to a flat rock where they could sit and look out over the landscape. For a while, they simply sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, breathing in the clean mountain air. "I want to show you something," Sam said finally. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wooden box. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small garnet stone. It was not expensive or flashy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, the gold worn smooth with age and love. "Delilah Summers," Sam said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I know we have not known each other long by most people's standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are my home, my heart, my future. Will you marry me?" Delilah looked at the ring, at Sam's hopeful face, at the vast, beautiful world spread out before them. A month ago, she had stepped off a stagecoach into a town that immediately judged and dismissed her. She had expected nothing from Eagar except loneliness and hard work. Instead, she had found love in its purest form, had found a man who saw past every defense and judgment to the person she really was. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Sam, I will marry you." Sam slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. Then he pulled her close and kissed her deeply, and Delilah felt as though she were flying, weightless and free, loved beyond measure. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Eagar, with Grace and Martha standing up as witnesses, and a handful of people from town attending out of curiosity more than support. The ceremony was simple, the preacher clearly uncomfortable with the match but bound by his duty to perform it. But when Sam said his vows, his voice rang clear and certain, and when Delilah promised to love him for all her days, she meant it with every fiber of her being. The boarding house residents threw them a small celebration afterward, with Martha's excellent cooking, and even a small cake that Grace had ordered from a baker in Springerville. It was not the grand society wedding Delilah's mother had once dreamed of for her, but it was perfect in its simplicity, filled with genuine warmth from the few people who truly cared. Sam had arranged to rent a small house on the outskirts of town, close enough to the Miller Ranch for easy access, but far enough from the center of Eagar to provide some privacy from the town's judgment. It was a modest 2-room house with a kitchen, a bedroom, and a small porch, but when Sam carried Delilah across the threshold, she felt like she was entering a palace. That first night as husband and wife, Sam was tender and patient, treating her like something precious. He kissed away her fears and insecurities, worshiping her body with his hands and mouth, until she believed what he had been telling her all along, that she was beautiful, that she was desired, that she was loved exactly as she was. They came together in passion and tenderness, and afterward, lying in his arms, Delilah felt a peace she had never known before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I cannot believe you are real, that this is real." "I love you too," Sam murmured against her hair. "And you better get used to me, because I plan on loving you for the next 50 or 60 years at least." Delilah laughed, the sound free and joyful. "I think I can manage that." Their early married life was not without challenges. The town remained largely hostile to their union, with some people going out of their way to make things difficult. The general store continued to refuse Delilah service, until Sam had a very pointed conversation with the owner that resulted in a grudging agreement to treat her fairly. Some of the ranchers' wives organized a quilting circle and deliberately excluded Delilah, making it clear she was not welcome in their social circles. But Sam and Delilah built a life that did not depend on the town's approval. Sam's work with the Miller Ranch was going well, his skill with horses earning him respect even from those who disapproved of his marriage. He began taking on private clients as well, training horses for ranchers throughout the territory, and his reputation grew. Delilah took in sewing and mending from a wider area, her skill becoming known beyond Eagar's borders, and she discovered she could build a business without relying on the local prejudices. They made friends slowly, finding the few people in the area who valued character over appearance. Martha and Grace remained staunch allies, as did a young family who had recently moved to the area and who treated the Lancasters with simple kindness. Sam's employer, Mr. Miller, proved to be a fair man who cared only about Sam's work ethic and ability, not about his choice of wife. 6 months after their wedding, Delilah realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. She had heard the whispered comments about how she should not have children, how she would pass on her size to them, how it was selfish of her to bring children into the world when they would inevitably face the same judgment she had faced. But when she told Sam, his reaction was pure elation. "A baby," he breathed, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Delilah, this is wonderful." "What if people are cruel to our child because of me?" Delilah asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if our baby has to suffer because of who their mother is?" Sam pulled her close, his embrace fierce and protective. "Then we will teach our child what we have learned, that other people's cruelty says nothing about their worth, that they are loved completely and unconditionally, that they come from strength and courage, from a mother who faced down a whole town's judgment and never stopped being kind. Any child of ours will be lucky to have you as their mother." Delilah cried against his chest, releasing fears she had been holding since the moment she saw the positive signs. Sam held her through it all, his presence steady and sure, his love unwavering. The pregnancy was difficult. Delilah was sick for the first few months, and the summer heat made everything worse. But Sam was there for every moment, bringing her cool water, rubbing her feet when they swelled, reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but rest. The townswomen offered no advice or support, but Martha and Grace more than made up for it, sharing their knowledge and experience with the enthusiasm of honorary grandmothers. In March of 1879, after 18 hours of labor, Delilah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Sam's father, and when the midwife placed him in Delilah's arms, she fell in love all over again. He was perfect, red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and Sam's eyes already starting to show blue-green. Sam cried when he held his son for the first time, tears running unashamedly down his face. "He is beautiful," he whispered, "just like his mother." "He has your eyes," Delilah said softly, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "Then he is lucky," Sam said, unable to take his eyes off the baby in his arms. "Because those eyes are going to help him see the world clearly, without judgment, just like his father tries to do." The early weeks with Thomas were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Delilah discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, managing sleepless nights and constant feedings with a determination born of fierce love. Sam helped however he could, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, bringing Delilah food and water and reminding her to rest. They were their own small unit, the three of them, and if the town still whispered about them, it mattered less and less. Delilah was too busy loving her husband and son to care what narrow-minded people thought. She had found her place in the world, not despite her body but simply alongside it, as a wife and mother and person of value. When Thomas was 3 months old, something shifted in the town. It started small: a woman at the church, nodding to Delilah instead of turning away. A shopkeeper's daughter asking if Delilah might be willing to alter a dress for her. A rancher's wife commenting that Thomas was a beautiful baby and asking about his temperament. Delilah realized that by simply living her life, by being a good wife and mother, by refusing to hide or apologize for existing, she was slowly, gradually, changing some minds. Not everyone's. There were still plenty of people who would never accept her, but enough. Enough to make life in Eagar bearable, even pleasant at times. Sam's business continued to thrive. Word of his skill with horses spread throughout the territory, and he was often hired to travel to other ranches for training and breeding consultations. Delilah sometimes went with him, Thomas strapped to her chest, and she saw how other towns reacted to them. Some places were just as judgmental as Eagar, others were more welcoming. But everywhere they went, Sam introduced her with pride as his wife, never hiding her, never apologizing for his choice. By Thomas's first birthday, they had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land just outside town. It was only 5 acres, but it had a creek running through it and good grazing for horses. Sam built them a larger house with his own hands, working evenings and weekends, and Delilah planted a garden that flourished in the mountain soil. They were building something real and lasting, a home that reflected their love and their values. When Thomas was 2, Delilah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and when their daughter was born in the spring of 1881, it felt like their family was complete. They named her Sarah, after Delilah's grandmother, who had been the only family member to show her consistent kindness during her childhood. Sarah was different from Thomas in every way, where he was serious and careful. She was bold and adventurous. Where he looked like Sam, she had Delilah's coloring and features. And she was fierce from the moment she entered the world, screaming her displeasure at being born and refusing to be ignored. "She is going to be a handful," the midwife predicted, and she was right. But Sarah was also pure joy, finding delight in every new discovery, laughing with her whole body, loving with an intensity that sometimes took Delilah's breath away. Thomas adored his little sister, protective of her from the start, and Sam was helplessly wrapped around her tiny fingers. The Lancaster family became a known presence in Eagar and the surrounding area. Sam's reputation as a horseman was unmatched, and Delilah's sewing and alterations business kept her busy. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. The town's attitude toward them continued to evolve slowly. There were still those who would never accept Delilah, who would always see her body before they saw her character. But there were also people who had come to respect the Lancasters, who saw the strength of their marriage and the love in their family, and recognized it as something admirable. When Thomas started school at age 5, Delilah worried intensely about how he would be treated, whether children would be cruel to him because of her. But Thomas was his father's son, confident and kind, and he made friends easily. If anyone said anything negative about his mother, Thomas defended her fiercely, with words when possible and with fists when necessary. Sam had to speak to him more than once about fighting, but Delilah could see the pride in her husband's eyes even as he lectured their son about using his words first. Sarah, when her turn came, needed no such lectures. She met any teasing with such ferocious defiance that other children quickly learned not to target her or her family. She was small but mighty, and she had inherited her father's sense of justice and her mother's determination in equal measure. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. Sam expanded their land holdings gradually, building a small but successful horse breeding operation. Delilah's sewing turned into designing as well, creating custom outfits for ranchers and their families that were both practical and beautiful. They were not the richest family in the territory, but they were among the happiest, and their home was always filled with laughter. When they had been married 10 years, Sam took Delilah back to the same mountain ridge where he had proposed. Their children were spending the night with Martha and Grace, who spoiled them shamelessly, and Sam and Delilah had a rare day entirely to themselves. They sat on the same flat rock, now worn smooth by a decade of visits, and looked out over the landscape they had come to love. "Do you ever regret it?" Delilah asked quietly. "Choosing me, staying in Eagar despite everything?" Sam turned to her with surprise. "Regret? Delilah, these past 10 years have been the best of my life. You and our children are everything to me. How could I possibly regret choosing to build a life with you?" "The town still talks sometimes," Delilah said. "I hear the whispers about how you could have done better, married someone prettier, someone more acceptable." "Then they are fools," Sam said firmly, taking her hand. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? I see the woman who was brave enough to start over in a new place, the woman who chose to be kind even when the world was cruel, the woman who gave me 2 incredible children and who makes our house a home. The woman I fall more in love with every single day. You are not just enough, Delilah. You are everything." Tears rolled down Delilah's cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. After 10 years, she finally, truly believed him. She had spent so long seeing herself through the town's eyes, through her parents' disappointment, through a society that valued appearance over character. But Sam had taught her to see herself differently, to value her own worth, to understand that she was deserving of love not despite who she was but because of it. "I love you," she said, kissing him softly. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else would." "Thank you for letting me," Sam replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy who fell in love with you at first sight." They stayed on the mountain until sunset, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple, and then they rode home together through the gathering darkness, comfortable in the silence that only comes from years of deep understanding. More years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Thomas grew into a young man very much like his father, quiet and capable, with a gift for working with animals. At 18, he began courting a young woman from Springerville, and when he brought her home to meet his parents, Delilah liked her immediately. The girl, Emma, had a kind heart and saw Thomas for who he was, and that was all Delilah required. Sarah, at 16, was already making noise about becoming a teacher, fired by a passion for education and a desire to help children who did not fit society's narrow expectations. She had seen how her mother was treated and had developed a fierce advocacy for the marginalized and misunderstood. Sam and Delilah could not have been prouder. The town of Eagar had grown over the years, becoming more established, more diverse. New families moved in regularly, and the old rigid hierarchies began to break down as the community became more focused on survival and cooperation in the harsh territory. The Lancasters were now respected members of the community, their opinions sought on matters ranging from horse breeding to land management to conflict resolution. Some of the old guard still disapproved of Delilah, still whispered about Sam's poor choice, but their voices grew fainter every year. The younger generation, who had grown up seeing the Lancaster marriage as an example of genuine partnership and love, did not share their parents' prejudices. Slowly, painfully, attitudes were changing. When Delilah was 43 and Sam was 47, they welcomed an unexpected surprise, another baby, a little boy they named Daniel. His arrival shocked everyone, including Delilah and Sam, but he quickly became the darling of the entire family. Thomas and Sarah doted on their little brother, and Sam joked that he was getting a second chance at fatherhood with the wisdom of age to guide him. Daniel was a happy, easy baby who seemed to sense the love surrounding him. Delilah, older and more confident now, enjoyed this pregnancy and infancy in ways she had not been able to with her first two children. She was not worried about what people thought anymore. She simply loved her baby and trusted that everything else would work itself out. The years continued to unfold in their steady rhythm. Thomas married Emma, and they built a house on the Lancaster property, working alongside Sam to expand the horse operation. Sarah went away to a teaching college in California, writing long letters home about her studies and her plans to return to Arizona and open a school for children from all backgrounds. Daniel grew into a curious, bright child who asked endless questions and wanted to know everything about everything. Sam's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Delilah's body changed with age, as all bodies do, but Sam still looked at her with the same love and desire he had shown from the beginning. They had built a life together that was rich in all the ways that mattered: love, family, purpose, joy. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. The entire community was invited, and to Delilah's amazement, most of them came. The house and yard were filled with people eating, laughing, celebrating not just a marriage but a love story that had defied expectations and prejudices to become something legendary in its own small way. Martha and Grace, now elderly but still sharp, presided over the festivities like benevolent queens. They had been there from the beginning, had believed in this love before anyone else, and they took great pleasure in seeing how right they had been. As the sun began to set, Sam pulled Delilah aside, away from the crowd, to a quiet spot near the creek that ran through their property. 25 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Delilah agreed, leaning into his side. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I found you, that we built all of this. You know what the best part is? Sam asked, turning to face her fully. It just keeps getting better. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, more than I did when you agreed to marry me, more than I did that first moment I saw you standing by the livery. Every day with you is a gift, Delilah. The town said I was too heavy to love, Delilah said softly, echoing words from a lifetime ago. But you said I was just right. You were and are just right, Sam confirmed. Perfect, in fact. Not because you are without flaws, none of us are, but because you are perfectly yourself. And that self is who I fell in love with and who I will love until my last breath. They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, surrounded by the sounds of their family and friends celebrating nearby. It was a perfect moment, made all the more precious because they both understood how rare and valuable such moments were. The years that followed brought their share of sorrows alongside the joys. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, with Grace holding her hand. Grace followed her friend 2 years later, and Delilah mourned them as the mothers she had never truly had in her own family. They had given her a chance when no one else would, and she never forgot that kindness. But there were also triumphs. Sarah returned from college and opened her school as planned, creating a place where every child was valued regardless of background or ability. Thomas and Emma had 3 children who filled the ranch with noise and laughter. Daniel, proving to be brilliant with numbers, began helping manage the business side of the horse operation while still in his teens. Sam and Delilah grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They took daily walks together, holding hands like newlyweds. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They still made each other laugh. And they still looked at each other with the wonder of people who knew they had found something rare and precious. When Sam was 68 and Delilah 64, they took one last ride up to their mountain ridge. Sam's joints ached from a lifetime of hard work, and Delilah moved more slowly than she once had. But they made the journey together, as they had done so many times before. They sat on their rock, now worn smooth by decades of visits, and looked out over the landscape that had witnessed their entire love story. "No regrets?" Sam asked, as he always did. "Not a single one," Delilah replied, as she always did. "Good," Sam said, pulling her close. "Because I have been thinking about what comes next. Thomas and Emma can handle the ranch now. Daniel has the business well in hand, and Sarah has her school running beautifully." "What are you suggesting?" Delilah asked, though she thought she knew. "I am suggesting we take that trip we always talked about. Go see the Pacific Ocean. Visit Sarah's school. Travel to places we have never been. We have worked hard our whole lives. Maybe it is time for some adventure." Delilah laughed, the sound carrying across the mountaintop. "You want to go on adventures at our age? Why not?" Sam asked, grinning. "We are not dead yet, and I want to see the world with you, Delilah. I want every remaining day we have to be full of new experiences and memories." "Then let us do it," Delilah said decisively. "Let us go have adventures." And they did. Over the next 5 years, they traveled throughout the West, seeing landscapes they had only imagined. They stood on the California coast and watched the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. They visited the Grand Canyon and marveled at its ancient beauty. They spent time with Sarah at her school, delighting in watching her work with her students. They even traveled back to St. Louis so Delilah could show Sam where she had grown up, and they stood in front of her childhood home together, closing a circle. Throughout it all, their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They held hands as they watched sunsets. They whispered together in strange hotel rooms. They laughed at mishaps and marveled at beauty, and supported each other through the inevitable aches and pains of aging bodies. When they finally returned to their ranch, ready to settle into a quieter routine, they found it bustling with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with Thomas and Emma managing everything beautifully, with Daniel keeping the books balanced and investments sound, with Sarah visiting regularly between school terms. Sam and Delilah moved into a smaller house they built on the property, leaving the main house to Thomas's growing family. It was perfect for them, cozy and manageable, with a porch where they could sit and watch the sun set over the mountains they loved. On the evening of their 40th wedding anniversary, their entire extended family gathered for a celebration. There were dozens of people now, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, friends and neighbors, students of Sarah's and clients of the ranch. The community that had once judged them so harshly now came to honor their love and their legacy. During the celebration, Thomas stood up to make a toast. He was a middle-aged man now, weathered and strong, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the gathered crowd. "I want to say something about my parents," he began. "I have heard the stories of how they met, how this town treated my mother, how my father refused to let that judgment matter. I have grown up watching them love each other through good times and bad, through hardship and joy. And I have learned something important from them, that real love sees beyond surface appearances to the heart of a person. That courage means standing by your convictions even when the whole world tells you you are wrong." that a life built on love and respect and partnership is richer than any life built on what other people think you should want. He raised his glass, and everyone else did the same. To Sam and Delilah Lancaster, thank you for showing us what true love looks like. Thank you for being an example of strength and grace. Thank you for building a family that knows how to love without conditions. Happy anniversary. The toast was echoed by everyone present, and Delilah found herself crying again, but these were tears of pure happiness. She looked around at all the faces, children and grandchildren who carried pieces of her and Sam forward into the future, friends who had proven that not everyone judged by appearance, neighbors who had learned to look deeper. "We did good," Sam whispered in her ear. "Did not we?" "We did very good," Delilah agreed, squeezing his hand. That night, after everyone had left and they were alone in their small house, Sam and Delilah sat on their porch in the rocking chairs Daniel had made for them. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night air was cool and sweet. "Do you remember what you said to me the night of that first dance?" Delilah asked. "When the whole town was staring and you said you were falling in love with me." "I remember every word I said to you that night," Sam replied. "I meant all of it then, and I mean it even more now." "You said I was just right," Delilah continued. "That is what I needed to hear. Not that you loved me despite how I looked or that you did not care about my body, but that I was just right, exactly as I needed to be." "You were and are just right," Sam said firmly. "You always have been, Delilah." The only thing that ever needed changing was the world's ability to see it. They rocked in comfortable silence, hands clasped between their chairs, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. They had lived a lifetime together, had built something beautiful from what the town said was impossible. They had proven that love was not about appearance or conforming to someone else's standards. It was about seeing each other clearly, accepting each other completely, and choosing each other every single day. "I would do it all again," Delilah said softly. "Every hard moment, every cruel word, every challenge. I would do it all again for the chance to love you and be loved by you." "Me too," Sam agreed. "Every single moment. You are the best decision I ever made, Delilah Lancaster." They sat together long into the night, two people who had defied expectations and built a love story for the ages. The town had said she was too heavy to love, but the cowboy had known the truth: she was not too anything. She was just right, exactly as she was, and together they had proven that love required no justification, no explanation, no apology. It simply was, pure and true and enduring, a light that would shine through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren for generations to come. A reminder that the measure of a person has nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with the content of their heart. And in the quiet darkness of that Arizona night, surrounded by the land they had built their life on, and the family they had created together, Sam and Delilah Lancaster rested in the peace that comes from a life well lived, and a love that conquered all the cruel judgments the world could throw at it. They had won, not through fighting or forcing anyone to change their minds, but simply by living their truth, by loving each other without reservation, by building something so beautiful and strong that eventually even the skeptics had to acknowledge it. The town had been wrong, and the cowboy had been right all along. Sometimes that was all the victory that mattered. They held hands as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it, exactly as they were meant to be. Just right, always just right, forever just right.